In today's episode, we follow a climber on Mount Rainier who refused to pay his Sherpa. Months of training hardened into arrogance, convincing him he knew better than the guide whose job was to keep him alive. That belief led to a decision so shockingly reckless, it would horrify anyone who's ever trusted a mountain. It was September 14th, 2016, at Mount Rainier National Park in Washington State. Climbers gathered at the Paradise Visitor Center in the early hours, preparing for late-season summit attempts as weather patterns shifted toward colder, less predictable conditions. The parking area was active with teams checking equipment, reviewing forecasts, and coordinating logistics before moving onto the mountain. Above them, the upper slopes of Rainier were already showing signs of seasonal change, with increasing cloud cover and the potential for rapid weather deterioration. The climber at the center of this incident was Akaya Levine, a 34-year-old software engineer from Seattle. He worked as a senior developer for a tech startup in the South Lake Union District and was known for a deliberate, analytical approach to problem solving. In the months leading up to the climb, Levine had gone through a recent divorce and was involved in an ongoing custody dispute over his 8-year-old daughter. He saw mountaineering as a way to cope with mounting personal stress, while those close to him questioned whether the risks he was taking reflected sound judgment. His fitness regimen had intensified dramatically over the past year. 3 evenings per week found him at the Vertical World Climbing Gym in Redmond, working through increasingly difficult boulder problems and top rope routes. Weekend hiking had evolved into scrambling, then into technical rock climbing at locations throughout the Cascades. His apartment walls displayed photographs from successful ascents of Mount Baker, Mount Adams, and several technical rock routes in the North Cascades. Yet Mount Rainier represented something different, a legitimate mountaineering objective that would require skills he had only read about in climbing manuals. The decision to hire a guide had not come easily. Akaya prided himself on self-reliance and had initially planned to attempt the mountain solo. However, research into the Disappointment Cleaver route revealed complexities that exceeded his experience level. Glacier travel, crevasse rescue techniques, and high-altitude route finding were skills that could not be learned from books or weekend climbing trips. After weeks of online research and forum discussions, he had contacted Pemba Sherpa through a mountaineering service that connected clients with freelance guides. Pemba Sherpa, in his early 40s, had grown up in the Khumbu region of Nepal before moving to the United States. His experience was extensive, including multiple high-altitude expeditions in the Himalayas and guiding clients in mountainous regions of the Pacific Northwest. When arranging the Mount Rainier climb, Pemba had quoted a flat fee for a 2-day expedition that included route guidance, technical instruction, and safety oversight. Akaya agreed to the price without negotiation, viewing it as an investment in both safety and learning. The financial arrangement had seemed straightforward. Akaya planned to bring cash for the guide fee and settle any additional expenses afterward. However, as the climb approached, he realized he had only a portion of the agreed amount in cash due to withdrawal limits and personal preferences. He planned to cover the remainder electronically once they returned to an area with cell coverage, believing this solution would satisfy both parties. The route they intended to follow begins at a popular trailhead at around 5,400 feet and ascends to a high-altitude base camp at over 10,000 feet on the first day, with a pre-dawn summit attempt the following day. The climb gains nearly 9,000 feet over roughly 9 miles, with the upper sections requiring travel across glaciers, crevasse navigation, steep snow and ice slopes, and rocky ridges that present significant technical challenges. Mountain weather in the region can change quickly, especially during the transition from summer to fall. Forecasts predicted a limited window of favorable conditions in the early hours, followed by a strong storm moving in from the west. Winds were expected to increase significantly, with heavy snow and near-zero visibility, likely later in the day. Temperatures at higher elevations were projected to drop well below freezing, with wind chills reaching extreme levels. Akaya and Pemba met at the trailhead before beginning their climb. Their initial interaction proceeded smoothly as they reviewed route plans, checked weather conditions, and conducted final gear inspections. Pemba examined Akaya's equipment with the practiced eye of someone who had seen clients arrive with inadequate or inappropriate gear. Overall, Akaya's setup was solid. A 4-season mountaineering tent, sleeping bag rated for extreme cold, insulated climbing boots, and technical outerwear suitable for alpine conditions. However, Pemba noted that his glacier travel gear was minimal, consisting of a basic climbing harness, a single ice axe, and lightweight crampons more suited to hiking than technical climbing. The ascent toward the high-altitude base camp began under partly cloudy skies with light winds. The initial section wound through subalpine meadows before transitioning to a broad snowfield that extended for nearly 2 miles at a steady incline. Akaya maintained a steady pace at first, but the effects of elevation and the weight of his pack quickly became apparent, and he needed frequent pauses to catch his breath and adjust his gear. Pemba observed Akaya's struggles with concern. While the software engineer was clearly in good physical condition, his breathing and movement suggested limited experience with sustained uphill travel under load. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as if the mountain itself was testing him. The guide had seen this pattern many times before, clients who excel in gym-based fitness but struggled with the specific demands of mountaineering. Still, Akaya's determination was evident, and he pressed on despite discomfort. They eventually reached the high-altitude camp as the sun began to set. The main shelter was already occupied by other climbing parties, so Akaya and Pemba set up their camp on a nearby flat platform. The evening routine of melting snow for water, preparing a simple meal, and organizing gear for the next day proceeded efficiently. It was during this time that the payment issue first surfaced. As they ate, Akaya brought up the guide fee. He explained that he had brought a portion of the cash, but planned to pay the remainder electronically once cell service was available. He showed evidence of sufficient funds on his smartphone, expecting the matter to be a minor administrative detail. Pemba's reaction was stronger than anticipated. He insisted that full payment was required before beginning the technical portions of the climb. He explained that past clients who promised electronic payments sometimes never followed through, and the guide industry largely operated on cash transactions. His caution reflected hard-earned experience rather than distrust of Akaya personally. Akaya attempted to reassure Pemba by showing additional signs of financial stability, emphasizing that any remaining payment would be completed once they returned to an area with cell service. Despite these reassurances, Pemba remained cautious, having encountered clients in the past who promised payment but failed to follow through. The discussion stretched on as both men tried to find a solution. Akaya offered extra compensation for the inconvenience, while Pemba suggested they could turn back and resume the climb once the payment issue was settled. Neither option satisfied both parties, and they ultimately agreed to proceed, with the understanding that the full payment would be made afterward. Sleep came fitfully for both. Akaya lay awake, replaying the conversation, wondering if he had made a mistake in not bringing enough cash. The combination of altitude, stress, and lingering tensions kept him restless. Pemba, meanwhile, considered the risk of guiding a client whose payment was uncertain, aware from experience that financial disputes often reflected broader judgment issues. Before dawn, they began the technical portion of the climb under clear skies with light winds. Headlamps illuminated the path as they roped together and moved across a glacier. The snow conditions were firm, providing good footing for crampons, but Akaya's inexperience quickly became apparent. At this point, even a small misstep could have fatal consequences. What might have been a straightforward section took far longer than anticipated, as the guide provided ongoing instruction in basic mountaineering skills. As they approached the base of the steep upper section, the route became more technical, requiring scrambling over loose rock and careful navigation around crevasses. Akaya's previous rock climbing experience helped his confidence here, but the altitude was beginning to affect him. Frequent pauses were needed to manage breathing and conserve energy, signaling the physical and mental challenges that lay ahead. As the morning light spread across the peaks and glacier-covered slopes, Akaya paused frequently to take photographs, despite Pemba's reminders about the need to maintain their pace. The guide grew increasingly concerned. Their progress was slower than expected, and weather reports indicated conditions could worsen as the day progressed. They had covered only part of the remaining distance to the summit, with the most technical and exposed sections still ahead. At a high point well below the summit, Pemba called for an extended rest to assess their situation. The weather remained deceptively clear, but high clouds were drifting in from the west, darkening the peaks with subtle menace, an ominous warning of a storm that could arrive faster than either of them anticipated. Akaya's energy was visibly waning. His movements were stiff and uneven, a reflection of both physical fatigue and the mental strain of high-altitude exertion. Pemba, ever observant, noted the small signs: labored breathing, lingering pauses to catch his breath, the occasional stumble that suggested muscles were shutting down sooner than they should have. During this pause, Pemba gently suggested the possibility of turning back. He explained that, at their current pace, attempting the summit and returning safely before the storm hit would be unlikely. Every second they lingered increased exposure risk, and the upper slopes offered no margin for error. Akaya's reaction was immediate, forceful, and unyielding. In his mind, he had invested months of preparation, money, and personal sacrifice. To stop now felt like surrender. He dismissed the forecast as overly cautious, insisting that the mountain would hold if they pushed while conditions still allowed, and that hesitation now would be more dangerous than pressing forward. The conversation quickly escalated into an argument. Akaya's frustration and pride sharpened his words. He accused Pemba of exaggerating the danger, even suggesting that the guide's caution was influenced by the unresolved payment issue from the previous evening. Pemba, whose calm demeanor rarely wavered, countered firmly. His judgment was born from 2 decades of high-altitude guiding, where experience had repeatedly proven that even small miscalculations could turn fatal. He emphasized that client safety, not summit ambition, was paramount. The tension that had simmered since the prior night's financial disagreement now erupted fully, a collision of inexperience and expertise, stubborn pride, and hard-earned caution. Around them, the mountain seemed to hold its breath. The faint whisper of wind through the ridges, a subtle reminder that nature was indifferent to human arguments. As the day progressed, the first signs of deteriorating weather became undeniable. Winds howled across the ridges, whipping loose snow into stinging arcs that reduced visibility to mere yards. Clouds thickened, moving rapidly from the west, swallowing distant peaks in a shifting gray void. Pemba's trained eye recognized the pattern instantly. Conditions that had been manageable in the morning were now tipping into a serious hazard. He made the call. It was time to begin descending. Safety, not pride or ambition, had to come first. Akaya's response was immediate and vehement. He refused to turn back, insisting they were close enough to the summit to press on despite the worsening storm. Frustration and fear for the investment he had made, months of preparation, money spent, and personal sacrifices coalesced into defiance. He even threatened to withhold payment if Pemba insisted on retreating, a stark reminder of the unresolved tension that had shadowed them since the previous night. The argument escalated as conditions deteriorated further. Snow drove sideways in sheets, ice forming on exposed gear, while gusts tossed loose rock and snow across the slopes. Pemba repeatedly urged him to descend, warning that the storm would intensify and that continuing upward was now a direct gamble with survival. Temperatures plunged, wind chill values approaching life-threatening extremes, and both men struggled to maintain warmth and focus, despite technical clothing. Faced with an impossible choice, Pemba prepared to descend alone, organizing ropes and checking his harness with practiced precision, fully expecting Akaya to follow. But Akaya unroped himself, ignoring every precaution, and pressed onward. Pride, panic, and stubborn determination collided, leaving him blinded to the danger he faced. He accused Pemba of abandoning him, even hinting at legal consequences, while the guide recognized the grim reality. He could not force a grown man to retreat, yet leaving him alone in such conditions violated every principle of safe guiding. Repeated attempts to persuade Akaya failed. The software engineer was resolute. The mountain's white fury was gathering, and there was nothing left to do but descend and hope that experience would keep one of them alive. As the risks escalate, remember there's a lot we can learn from these accidents. Subscribe and turn on notifications to catch every detailed breakdown of extreme climbing incidents. Ultimately, with whiteout conditions fully established, Pemba began his descent alone. He left Akaya with clear instructions for the route, emergency procedures, and guidance on following established markers. His decision was based on experience. Staying with an uncooperative client in such dangerous conditions would likely have endangered both their lives. Pemba promised to summon help as soon as he reached safety and communication was possible, hoping that the clear instructions and his repeated warnings might be enough to prevent tragedy. Akaya watched Pemba disappear into the swirling snow and immediately regretted his decision to continue alone. But pride, frustration, and stubborn determination anchored him in place. His mind raced between panic and rational thought, and for a fleeting moment, he considered calling out to the guide, or even turning back. But the roar of the wind swallowed his voice. Instead, he shouldered his pack and forced his legs upward into the storm, each step heavy with the weight of fear and exhaustion. The swirling snow blurred every landmark, and the once familiar route dissolved into a vast, featureless expanse. His compass became a futile tool, spinning silently in the blinding whiteness, while snow and ice coated every surface, making footing treacherous and slow. The temperature had dropped to approximately -10 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill values plunging to -30 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Akaya's extremities began to lose feeling despite his insulated gloves and boots, and his fingers stiffened around the ice axe he clutched for stability. Each breath was a struggle, the thin air biting deep into his lungs, carrying the sting of frost into every inhalation. Snowflakes turned to ice as they struck his goggles and face mask, building into layers that obscured vision and stung exposed skin. The weight of his pack, which had seemed manageable in the morning light, now felt impossible, dragging him downward even as he tried to climb upward. His energy reserves, already taxed by the day's exertion, began to fail, and every step demanded a conscious effort to overcome both fatigue and fear. By 11 a.m., the magnitude of his situation sank in. He was lost. The terrain around him was a monotone of gray and white, slopes and ridges indistinguishable from one another, stretching endlessly in every direction. Snow obliterated the tracks he had painstakingly left behind only minutes earlier, erasing any trace of his path. Panic bubbled beneath his exhaustion, a creeping awareness that each choice, or misstep, could be the last. Alone at nearly 13,000 feet, in a storm that reduced the world to near zero visibility, Akaya faced the stark reality that he had no way to call for help, no clear route to safety, and no guide to intervene. Every instinct screamed danger, yet every step forward became a desperate gamble against the mountain itself. Akaya's attempts at self-rescue became increasingly desperate and disorganized. He wandered in what he thought were systematic search patterns, trying to locate the established climbing route or any recognizable landmarks. However, his movements were actually taking him further from safety and deeper into the crevasse fields that characterized the upper reaches of the Disappointment Cleaver route. The combination of altitude, cold, and stress was impairing his judgment and decision-making abilities. By noon, the first signs of serious hypothermia were becoming apparent. Akaya's fine motor control was deteriorating, making it difficult to operate zippers, adjust his gear, or maintain his grip on his ice axe. His speech became slurred, though there was no one to hear him. Most critically, his ability to think clearly and make rational decisions was compromised by his dropping core body temperature. The wind continued to increase throughout the early afternoon, with sustained speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour and gusts approaching 70 miles per hour. The combination of wind and snow created complete whiteout conditions that extended visibility to less than 10 feet in any direction. Akaya's progress slowed to a crawl as he struggled to maintain his footing on the increasingly icy slopes. Several times he fell and had the difficulty getting back to his feet, a clear indication that his physical coordination was severely compromised. Around 12:30 p.m., Akaya made the decision to seek shelter and wait for the storm to pass. However, his location in the open glacier terrain offered no natural protection from the wind and driving snow. He attempted to dig a snow cave using his ice axe, but his deteriorating motor skills made this task nearly impossible. After 20 minutes of ineffective digging, he abandoned the effort and continued wandering in search of better shelter. Akaya's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The shivering that had kept him moving and alert began to fade, leaving him sluggish and disoriented. Despite the worsening cold, he felt a strange warmth and pressed on, wandering aimlessly across the glacier, unaware of how serious his situation had become. Akaya's movements had become unsteady and erratic. He stumbled frequently and had a difficulty maintaining his balance on the uneven snow surface. His pack, which contained essential survival gear, including his sleeping bag and shelter, felt impossibly heavy. In his confused state, he made the critical decision to abandon the pack in order to move more easily, removing his last realistic chance of surviving the storm through emergency shelter. Without the weight of his pack, Akaya initially felt more mobile and continued his search for the descent route. However, he was now completely exposed to the elements with only the clothing he was wearing for protection. The wind chill at his elevation and in the prevailing conditions was extreme, capable of causing frostbite within minutes and rapidly sapping strength in inadequately protected individuals. His wandering became increasingly random as his cognitive abilities deteriorated further. He was no longer able to maintain any sense of direction or purpose. Several times he walked in complete circles, passing the same terrain features without recognizing them. His tracks, briefly visible between wind gusts, revealed the erratic pattern of someone who had lost control of both body and mind. At one point, Akaya collapsed for the first time. He managed to get back to his feet after several minutes of struggle, but his coordination was severely compromised. His speech had become completely incoherent, and he began removing his outer gloves and hat, feeling overheated despite the life-threatening cold. Eventually, he collapsed again near a crevasse field, not far from the established descent route. This time, he lacked the strength and coordination to rise. His body was succumbing to the extreme conditions, with the cold and wind overwhelming his ability to maintain consciousness. The combination of altitude, exposure, and deteriorating physical condition created a situation that would be fatal even for experienced climbers. Pemba descended safely through the storm, using his experience and knowledge of the route to reach a safe shelter where other climbing parties had taken refuge. He stayed briefly, hoping Akaya might return, but it became clear he would not, and Pemba continued down to the base. Once there, he reported Akaya's last known location and equipment to park authorities. Rescue teams evaluated the situation, but determined that searching during the storm would be too dangerous, so they waited for conditions to improve. Several days later, aerial reconnaissance located Akaya's body near the upper route, slightly off course. A specialized rescue team reached the site to confirm the death. The extreme cold, high winds, and deep snow made the approach challenging, requiring careful coordination to ensure rescuer safety. The official investigation concluded that Akaya died from hypothermia, with exhaustion and dehydration as contributing factors. There was no evidence of trauma, falls, or impairment. His final hours reflected the hazards of high-altitude climbing, particularly in severe weather, and highlighted the critical importance of preparation, caution, and adherence to expert guidance. Even the most careful preparation could not replace respect for the mountain's power. Akaya's death prompted changes in high-altitude climbing practices, with guides refining turnaround times, client screening, and emergency protocols to reduce risk. The incident highlighted the tension between ambition and safety, and his family urged that no blame be placed on those facing impossible decisions in extreme conditions. Today, his body remains on Mount Rainier, a stark reminder that preparation and caution must always come before personal ambition. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.